living through what we've lived through as a people, as a culture, as a community, I think my actual definition or the meaning of public health to me has changed, which for me is equity. That's what public health means to me. And I know that sometimes people think of equity, specifically health equity, as a part of public health, like it is a segment of public health. But when you really think about what public health is, the first word is public, right? Which is meant to be inclusive. And so when I think of public health, I think of populations that need to be reached that often aren't reached. These are underrepresented populations. These are sometimes described as vulnerable populations. I think it also means looking at the healthcare system and the integration or intersection rather of the healthcare system into public health. And because, you know, one is preventative and one is treatment, but it really should be a continuum.
This is the Public Health Millennial Career Stories podcast, where you'll hear about diverse career stories, career strategies, get tips, and learn from others to help you in your public health career journey. If you want to learn about public health careers, or just hear public health stories, stay tuned because you won't want to miss this. Welcome to the Public Health Millennial Career Stories podcast, episode number 58. Hi everyone, Omari Richards here. Definitely, if you have not, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, leave a like, share this with a friend, and everything like that. It greatly helps get the show out to more people. It helps more people know about the show and just know and understand how they can better navigate the public health career. So I would greatly appreciate it if you do that. Be sure to follow me on Instagram if you don't. That's at the PH Millennial. And if you want to support the show, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/the PH Millennial and support there. This episode is packed with a ton of great information from an ambitious person who didn't let anyone tell her no, and I really enjoyed and liked her drive. I did want to let you all know that there is a 10% discount with one of her partners at More Stats Consulting. So if you're thinking about getting like statistical consultant to get your documents or whatever the case might be top notch, definitely tap into that. So be sure to listen out to the end or check the show notes, and the information for that will be there as well. But without further ado, I hope you enjoy. Today, we have a highly motivated epidemiologist and science copy editor with strong analytic and communication skills and over 15 years of demonstrated experience in disease surveillance and research in science and for public health programs. She has a bachelor's in chemistry from Virginia State University, then went on to get her PhD in cell and development biology at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, which she continued on to get her Master of Public Health at UNC Chapel Hill. She got her postdoctoral fellowship at UNC Chapel Hill as well. She is the founder and principal consultant at Indices Consulting LLC. We have Dr. Tiana Garrett-Cherry, PhD, MPH. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Omari. Thank you for having me.
It is my pleasure. I'm looking forward to hearing more about your story and just you sharing more of your insights on your journey in public health.
Absolutely.
So tell me, how have you been and how have you been coping during these times?
I think I've been faring about as well as everyone else, which is trying to take it day by day. There has been some challenges professionally and personally that I think many people have experienced, but the pandemic for me definitely has been a period of growth and exploration. So I've really been fortunate to be able to just feel like I've become wiser and stronger through this process.
I love to hear that. I know it has been tough for a lot of people, but I definitely do believe a lot of people have come out of the pandemic, although we're not out of the pandemic. Just
Yes.
with a lot more than they went into the pandemic. So I appreciate people who have that growth mindset and were able to build and create and do more during the pandemic, as hard as that was. So tell me, how do you identify, and tell us a little bit about your personal background?
Oh, how do I identify? That's such a layered question. So let me just start professionally. I was trained as a lab scientist. and then went on to become an epidemiologist. And now I've actually transitioned my career into doing scientific editing. So if I could describe myself professionally, I guess the best way of putting it is multifaceted. And that's really been in every sense of the word throughout my entire career. My personal background, I am a new puppy mommy. And so I'm very excited about that. I'm from Virginia and had primarily lived in either the DC, Northern Virginia area or the Southeastern Virginia area for a significant period in my life. I have done quite a few travels and have lived in different places, but this has pretty much been my mainstay.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. How has it been being a new puppy mommy?
Um, so full disclosure, I don't have any kids, but I feel like this is the closest I'm ever gonna get to it. Yeah, he's a cute little cavapoo named Rollo, and he is really a joy to be around, but all of the challenges that go along with having a puppy, including houseworking and crate training, I'm having to do it all right now. I'm only 2 weeks in, so I know I have a ways to go. But so far, he is truly the love of my life.
Well, that's amazing to hear, and I wish you the best with all that training. And I know that you're welcome. I know that I had a foster, and they gave me a puppy a couple months back, and it was quite an experience. I'll just say that. So tell me, what does public health mean to you?
Oh gosh, you know what? I've been asked this question before, and I think living through what we've lived through as a people, as a culture, as a community, I think my actual definition or the meaning of public health to me has changed, which for me is equity. That's what public health means to me. And I know that sometimes people think of equity, specifically health equity, as a part of public health, like it is a segment of public health. But when you really think about what public health is, the first word is public, right? Which is meant to be inclusive. And so when I think of public health, I think of populations that need to be reached that often aren't reached. These are underrepresented populations. These are sometimes described as vulnerable populations. I think it also means looking at the healthcare system and the integration or intersection rather of the healthcare system into public health. And because, one is preventative and one is treatment, but it really should be a continuum, right? And really looking at how to bring that intersectionality together. But I really just think at the end of the day, the most important word in the term public health is public. And it really comes down to making sure that there is equal access to preventative care and to resources for everyone.
I love that. And I love that your definition for public health also changed, because I think sometimes we get stagnant in our thought processes, and I feel like the experiences and the knowledge that we get throughout life definitely can help shape how we do view things. And yeah, I love that. And I think that we should always think about equity as public health, because I feel like it is just ingrained in every sense of the word, and I think we need a lot more push for that equity in a whole host of different ways. Yeah, so thank you for sharing that.
Yes.
So you got your Bachelors of Science in Chemistry at Virginia State University. So what was the thought process for going in for this degree?
Yeah. So I've always been a science geek. A kid that would read the encyclopedia, like that's always been me. But I've always truly had an affinity for science. And when I decided to go to college, I specifically wanted to go to a historically Black college, or university or HBCU, because I wanted that type of experience. And so deciding to go to Virginia State, it was fairly close to home for me. So it gave me the luxury of being slightly independent, but also kind of being tethered back to my hometown. So that was great. But as far as getting my degree in chemistry, honestly, I wanted to do the hardest thing I thought I could. Right. And with the exception of physics, like chemistry was like the only other thing. And so that's what I decided to go into, was chemistry. At the time, I really did not know what I wanted to do in science, but I knew I wanted to do something that was science related, medical related, some type of potentially clinical aspect to it. So chemistry just seemed to be the right field for me to go in at the time, the right type of education that I should be gathering at that time. And it actually did open up a lot for me. I ended up taking just as many biology classes as I did chemistry classes. I really could have done a minor in biology if I took like one or two more classes. And I actually did get a minor in math while I was there. And so again, I was just kind of like, if it's interesting to me, I'm going to go for it. And chemistry definitely gave me the background that I felt like I wanted, and the level of complexity that I felt like I needed to move on to the next step in my education.
And that's amazing that you said that you did it, because it was one of the most challenging things, and you want to get challenged. That's definitely not what you hear from most people. Most people are like, give me the easiest thing to do and I'll do that. So what is that mindset that you had for that?
You know, I could tell you a story behind it. I actually met someone when I was in high school who asked me, you know, I was telling this person I was going on to university, and asked me, you know, what was I thinking of majoring in? And I was, you know, teetering between biology or chemistry, or, you know, something in that area. And he said, well, you know, girls don't do chemistry. So, you know, why would you think about doing that? And that was enough of a challenge for me.
I like that.
So I went for it and graduated summa cum laude. So
all right, shout out to you, Black Girl Excellence. Love it. And I think that's the mindset that we should, and people should try to emulate. Like when someone tells you can't do it, or you shouldn't be doing it, you don't even tell them anything, just do it and then let them see.
Exactly.
So, yeah, that's awesome. So I definitely agree. Chemistry is a hard major. I'm glad that I didn't do my major in chemistry. Kudos to you for doing that, and I guess doing very well as well. What did you have any big takeaways that you had during your undergrad?
I think my biggest takeaways were, as an undergraduate student, take advantage of every opportunity that you have during your summer break. So with the exception of one summer break, I did an internship every summer. And my internships were at Penn State University. They were at University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I did one at a local health department, and it was always just trying to edify my skill set over the summer. I felt like it was important for me to do that, not only for potentially my, you know, further in my education, but also just to kind of understand and see how I could apply what I had learned previously to a real world situation. And so I think that when you're in your undergraduate education, one of the best things that you can do is look for internships, look for externships, look for opportunities to shadow people, especially during those summer months, because it really gives you the opportunity to build your resume and to expand your skill set.
Yeah, that is absolutely great advice, and I definitely echo everything you just said. Um, so you graduated from your Bachelor's of Science in Chemistry from Virginia State University, and then you went on to get your PhD in Cell and Developmental Biology at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Did you know that you wanted your PhD when you were graduating? When did this come up into the thought process, and why Cell and Developmental Biology?
Yeah, so another story. When I was doing the internship at University of Maryland, Baltimore County, I was in a laboratory with graduate students and other undergraduates. and it was a very revered high-level laboratory. And honestly, the first time I had ever been in that setting. And at the time, I met this young lady, and it was a Black young lady who had just finished her undergraduate and was going on to do her PhD. And that was the first time that I had ever seen someone who looked like me getting a PhD. And so I remember she had taken a trip to Stanford, which is where I think she ended up doing her PhD. And she came back to the lab and we were having lunch. It was just a group of us having lunch. And I asked her, what made you think about getting a PhD? And she said, when you get a PhD, it shows people that you can do anything. And that was all I needed to hear. And so she really set the course for me, because her future aspirations were actually to go into politics, but she was going to get her PhD in a biological science. But, you know, the foundation was there. And so I said, you know what? Black girl magic, I'm going for it. And so that's what really started me to thinking about getting a PhD. This wasn't until the summer between my junior and my senior year of undergrad. But then it was full steam ahead.
Yeah, that is amazing. I'm glad that she was there to show you that you could do the PhD, and you can see another Black girl doing it, and as you definitely have the drive to do it, and that's awesome. So why cell and developmental biology?
So you know, I have to actually take a step back before I answer that question, because then the next question became, where am I going to go to get this PhD, right? Mm-hmm. So again, I've always kind of been one of those people that's interested in a little bit of everything, right? Like I like to consider myself a jack of all trades. And so I really was interested in doing an interdisciplinary biomedical program. I didn't want to just jump into a graduate program without being able to kind of like have touch points in different programs to see what I would like. Because at the time, you know, I was coming from chemistry, but I had a significant amount of biology under my belt. Math was under my belt. I didn't know if I wanted to stay on the chemistry track or if I wanted to do more biological work. And so I ended up literally, now this is back in the day. I think we even still had Ask Jeeves on the internet. I actually typed into the search engine interdisciplinary medical programs. And one of the top programs that came up was the interdisciplinary biomedical sciences program at UNC Chapel Hill. And so at the time, it was a newish program, specifically for that university. And I said, you know what, this is going to give me everything that I want, because the way that it was structured was that in your first year, you were able to do rotations in 3 different laboratories or 3 different departments, and you could choose those. And it was an open selection process. You could say, hey, I want to do something in the Department of Pathology for one rotation, and say, hey, I want to do something in the Department of Microbiology in the next rotation. And so that's what kind of led me to that program. And then specifically cell and developmental biology, during those rotations, I ended up getting in the lab of Dr. Keith Burridge, who is known for his work. And I don't mean to get too sciencey, but these small molecules called small GTPases, which facilitate and cell function on a number of different levels. And my experience in his lab is what really drove it home for me. He was super encouraging. He understood that this was a very new aspect of work for me. And he was just very open to my ideas and helping me develop as a critical thinker. And so his lab is what led me to that department, because that's the department that his lab was in. And so that's why I have my degree, my PhD in cell and developmental biology.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to you seeking out experiences as you're giving advice for in your undergrad, saying that definitely take the take summer time to get those experiences, get those internships, externships, and whatever the case might be. And you looked for this degree, and you realized that there would be this rotation, and that in itself is a learning experience where you get to learn more about what you like, what you don't like, and going forward from there. So that's an awesome experience, and I'm glad that you had a professor slash mentor to really help you and guide you and help you to critically think about it. So during your time, you were also a teaching assistant and graduate research assistant at UNC Chapel Hill. Do you want to talk a little bit about those?
Yes. So really, all of this again was under the tutelage of Dr. Burridge. He had a dual professorship in the School of Medicine as well as the department. So he would teach medical students cell biology, and he would take his top graduate students with him to help as an assistant. And so for about 2 or 3 years, when he was teaching that class, I was facilitating specifically with the laboratory portion of those classes. So I was working with the medical students in learning parts of the cell, doing very basic experimentation, just again, applying things that I was actually doing in the lab and actually in an indirect way teaching them to medical students and reinforcing what he was teaching medical students. But what I was doing was more on the applied level. And so that's where the teaching assistant ship came in. And as a graduate research assistant, that really was my role as a graduate student. If you're getting your PhD, you're actively doing work, academic work that will drive what your PhD question is going to be, or the question for your dissertation is going to be, or questions. And so that really was just my title at the time.
Okay. And was it a difficult transition for you from undergrad to your PhD, especially knowing that you did like a chemistry major and then you're coming in to do more biology stuff?
It was, but to be totally honest, academically, I was learning things a different way. And it, how can I say this? It was less memorization and more synthesis. And not that I did not get that on the undergraduate level, because I did. It just had to be applied in a more comprehensive way. And so that was, a bit of a, it took me back a little bit. Like I was like, I'm used to, because I was always like the smarty pants, right? So it's like, oh, I can get through this in no time. And then I'm like, oh, wow, I got to study this for a couple of hours, right? Yeah, that definitely was a bit of a challenge for me. Also, full disclosure, was a difference in culture, right? I had gone from an HBCU to a predominantly white institution, and that culture change was also something, especially on the graduate level, right? There were a lot of people of color on the graduate level, primarily people of color who were women. And so that was a bit of a transition for me, but it also was an opportunity for growth. And it was also an opportunity for networking. And it was also an opportunity to, really just understand my place in this world and how I would be able to shine. And so even though there were some challenges and sometimes some limitations, like sometimes you realize, this just isn't the thing for me. It really helped me grow as a person.
That's awesome. And I love that mindset of just having opportunities and viewing it as opportunities to learn or grow, network. And that I think is just a mindset that people should try to cultivate and take away. So after this, you went on to get your Master's of Public Health at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill through a postdoctoral fellowship at UNC Chapel Hill. Right. But tell me, how did you get introduced to public health? How did public health come up into your mind? Because you went from chemistry to mental biology to now a Master's of Public Health. So tell me.
I know it kind of sounds like I'm all over the place, but I promise you, it's more linear than it thinks. than you think. So I actually had always been interested in public health. If you remember, I mentioned previously that I had worked at a health department. That was one of the internships that I had done earlier in my education. And so I was actually exposed to public health very early, and had thought about getting a degree in public health, but was having difficulty finding funding. And so when I was trying to figure out, what was I going to do as far as my next step, getting the Master's of Public Health just kind of made sense, because it was a full circle moment for me. It was me saying, Tiana, why did you even do this in the first place? Like, what mindset helped you arrive to this point? And it always went back to public health, because as much as I love science and as much as I love medicine and what I was doing at the time, I knew I wanted to apply it on a larger level. I knew I wanted to be more population level. And so going into public health just made sense at the time. I was already at one of the most prestigious institutions with one of the highest ranking public health programs in the country. So I was like, hey, like literally I'm walking across the street to get this MPH. And it just made sense at the time. I kind of realized that working in the laboratory, as wonderful as an experience as it was for me, I really wanted to branch out. And so going into public health helped me to satisfy a few needs. And one of those needs being to help people on a larger scale.
Okay, and that makes a lot of sense. And I feel like that's the same sort of sentiment that I hear from a lot of people who start off in biology or chemistry and then go on to pursue public health. So tell me about how, because you got your Master's of Public Health through, or it was at least funded through the postdoctoral fellow at UNCG. So tell me about that. And then you were talking to me before the interview about how you integrated new skill sets. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Okay, so I was fortunate to be able to get a NIH NRSA postdoctoral fellowship, which is what essentially funded my Master's of Public Health work. So I worked specifically in cardiovascular disease epidemiology. The reason why I chose cardiovascular disease epidemiology actually stems from the type of work I was doing in my PhD, where I was looking at the development of blood vessels. And so I kind of wanted to take that understanding on the molecular level and apply it to populations. But I was extremely fortunate because this was apex in cardiovascular disease epidemiology, where people were really starting to look at genetic epidemiology. And so I was able to bring my understanding of the molecular underpinnings of cardiovascular disease and blood vessel development to, okay, what particular genes may predispose certain groups of people to heart disease or to stroke or to diabetes or to diabetic retinopathy. So it was actually a great chance for me to apply what I had learned in my PhD. And then that fellowship itself, which I don't remember if I applied for it or if I was nominated for it. I just know I was blessed to get it. And it did. It funded my Master's of Public Health. And then after that, I worked as a postdoctoral fellow within the same department, the cardiovascular disease epidemiology department, doing work primarily in genetic epidemiology of cardiovascular diseases.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm going to assume here that your concentration for your MPH was epidemiology.
Yes, it was.
So tell me, why do you choose epidemiology?
It just made logical sense coming from the laboratory. I looked at different areas under the public health umbrella, and I knew I wanted to stick to something that it just makes sense to me analytically. Like if I'm going to go from laboratory sciences, what would be the most logical area within public health to go into. And then the more that I learned about how outcomes are measured on the population level, I knew that I had made the right decision. Because, you know, you hear statistics, but you don't understand, unless you've studied them, how these statistics are actually developed. Or, you know, you'll hear a rate 1 in 100,000 people, but you don't really understand what that is until you really start to study epidemiology. And so once I kind of made that connection, I was like, oh, okay. So when the CDC releases something that says X, this is how they got that number. Right. And so that's where the connection came in for me, and epidemiology definitely just seemed like the right transition for me to move into after my PhD.
Okay, that's absolutely fair enough, and it definitely aligns. And I would imagine that you had a lot of skill sets that were transferable, or that you were able to build on, like different foundational knowledge from that. So do you want to share any other takeaways that you had during your Masters of Public Health?
So I do have to mention, I completed my PhD in 5 years. And I remember when other people in my cohort were finishing their dissertations, and, you know, many of them were going on to postdocs, directly into postdocs, and asking me, what was I going to do? And I was like, well, I'm going to get another degree. They're like, what? After you've gone through all this? And get a degree in something that was seemingly unrelated, right, to what I had been doing in the previous 5 years. And so I think one of the biggest takeaways for me was, it's always okay to pivot. It's always okay to pivot. You kind of got to go where your heart takes you, right? Because people say that you don't want a job, you want a career. And a career is something where you honestly enjoy what you're doing and you're lucky enough to make money doing it, right? And so sometimes you can start on one course and realize, I like this, but I don't like that. That's okay, but this could be better. It's always okay to pivot. And so that's what I did.
Absolutely, I love that. And I think changing your mind is a superpower that people don't utilize enough. People are sometimes just molded in this, okay, and I said this, I got to do this, but I feel like life happens and you just get new information, and just your perspective on life changes, and you can change what you want to do. And as you said, it's better to be more passionate about something and get a career that you're passionate about, that you would work for free, basically, would get paid to do it.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I definitely understand what you're saying there. So you graduated from your MPH, and then you went on to become an Epidemic Intelligence Service Officer at the DC Department of Health.
Yes.
So tell me about how did you get this, and then what did you do with it?
Okay, so after about 2.5 years, maybe 3 years of doing research epidemiology, I actually had how can I put this? It was a serendipitous interaction with someone who was an adjunct professor within my department. Her name is Dr. Sarah Houston. And I found out that she worked at the health department, the state health department in North Carolina. And so I sheepishly one day went to her office and introduced myself. And I told her that I was interested in learning more about what she did. And I asked her, could I shadow her one day? And she said yes. And so she allowed me to shadow her. So I went to her other office that was within the state health department. And she was telling me about all the type of work that she did, which I found extremely fascinating, and really at the time did not realize that it was called applied epidemiology, and was actually different from what I was doing at the time, which was research and more academic based. And so I kind of fell in love with it. Like I kind of fell in love with the concept of being a disease detective, right? Like, hey, you know, there's this outbreak happening and we have to find out what the culprit is. Like that was extremely fascinating to me. And so as she was telling me about what she did, She asked me if I had ever heard of the Epidemic Intelligence Service, that is a postgraduate program that is hosted by the CDC. And I actually had, but it was one of those things where I placed it in the back of my mind, like, well, I don't have my credentials to really make myself eligible for that program yet. So I'll tuck it away. And so when she mentioned it to me, I said, yeah, I have heard of it. And she was actually alumni, or an alumna of the program. And so she talked to me about it. And she was the one who really opened my eyes to, hey, this is something I could do. And so I did my deep dive into learning more about the program and what it offered. And I said, hey, I'm just going to apply for it. I knew that it was an extremely coveted program, that it was going to be, a difficult program to potentially get into. But I said, hey, I'm just going to try. I didn't know if my background was going to be attractive because I was coming from a laboratory science, and then I had a little bit of epi, and then it was like research epi. And I'm like, I don't know if they're really going to want someone like me. But it was honestly the best career decision that I ever made. And it really opened the door for me. So within this program, it is, you do the footwork, you do the epidemiology footwork, you become the disease detective, you're able to do the things that we see now, like with the COVID pandemic. You see how epidemiologists are really pushing the information out there, pushing the trends of, what we should be doing, what we shouldn't be doing, getting out public health messaging, all of those things. That's the type of stuff that I learned as an EIS officer, and it was illuminating. So I specifically did my work at the DC Department of Health. So I spent 2 years there, working in that capacity, and I worked on everything, Mari. Like when I tell you I worked on everything, I did some health economics, I did outbreak investigations, I had a multi-state outbreak investigation that I had, and I was petrified, but I had great people working beside me that were pushing me along the way. I worked on a cardiovascular disease report that they were trying to get out. I did some HIV and STD work, looking at STD prevalence in the school system in DC. I mean, I did a little bit of everything, and it was wonderful. I didn't know what I was going to be doing day to day, which was scary and fun at the same time. It was definitely eye-opening for me, and it really paved the way for my career.
Okay, that's amazing, and it sounds like a wonderful experience where you got to learn and dive into work in a lot of different facets of public health. So tell me what is the difference between a applied epidemiologist and a research epidemiologist?
So a research epidemiologist is one who is going to apply those same epidemiological concepts, but they're likely to do it more in a prescribed manner. And so they may, for example, have a certain study that they've done, or a certain study that they're affiliated with, and they already have a cohort of people or a group of people that they've already collected data from. And then with that data, they go back and they think about, what type of research questions might we be able to answer with this data that has already been collected. And then they use that data in order to write papers, inform policies, that type of thing. So a lot of it is the data are already there, or they may even have to create a study to collect the data. But at the end of the day, what they're doing is really using that data to address specific research questions. Whereas applied epidemiology, you're a little bit closer to the population that you serve. So you may be the person that if there's a foodborne outbreak and people need to be called and there needs to be an investigation as to whether a person may have been exposed to a certain food in a restaurant or not, you're the person calling. Like you're the person who is cold calling someone and telling them, this is X Department of Health, and we have information that suggests that you may have been exposed to X agent and Y restaurant. We'd like to talk to you about your experience, your medical history, your current medical condition, and you're the one who's collecting that information. And you're doing this in real time, right? Like you're doing this because typically there is something happening or about to happen that you're trying to investigate to either stop or get ahead of, right? And so with applied epidemiology, it's really more of investigation and surveillance, and using that to either create a study such as a case control study to understand what people may have been exposed to something versus what people may not have been exposed. And then, coming up with, okay, this is the culprit that we want to look into. And then using that to inform the public, like, okay, we found this out through this information that we've collected. Stay away from X restaurant, or X restaurant is closed down because,
Okay.
So that's essentially the difference between the two. Is with research, typically a population has already been set. You're developing research questions and using the data that's been collected previously. Or it could have been collected, at the same time, but you're using that to answer a research question. Whereas applied epidemiology, you're really, trying to collect the information as soon as it is available and using that information to address something that's happening like right there immediately that you would either want to prevent or delay.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you for that explanation and those definitions. So you were talking, or you referred to, during your MPH, you had like more research epidemiology, epidemiology skill sets, and then in this position you were doing more applied epidemiology. Looking back, or like giving advice to someone who's doing the epidemiology degree right now and wants to do more of the applied epidemiology, what advice would you give them to get that type of experience?
The only way you can get that experience is working in the trenches. I'm just going to be honest. I think the best way of doing that on the graduate level or even the undergraduate level is to find out if there is a group or a club on your campus that does that type of work, that actually go out in the field and collect data that they use for critical decision making to answer an immediate question. And so when I was at UNC Chapel Hill, there actually was a group of people that did that. They were doing applied epidemiology. I did not realize that's what it was at the time, but they were doing applied epidemiology. And one thing that I remember specifically that they did was in North Carolina, and sometimes they are susceptible to hurricanes. And so this group would go out into communities and do like environmental scans of the community and talk to people and find out, what type of damage was done, what type of preventative measures did you take, what could be done better by the county or the community that you're in to, prevent damage to your property. They were doing applied epidemiology. They were getting numbers on how many people may have been injured, were your pets injured. They were actually going out and doing the footwork. And so, there are groups on campuses that do that type of stuff. So it would be great to find that. Also, see if you can shadow someone at a local health department. Doesn't have to be at the state level. Your local, almost every jurisdiction has a health department or some type of health agency that is meant to serve that local population. And so, seeing if you could talk to someone that does something that you're interested in and seeing that if you can shadow them. Look for internships at the CDC or even universities that have schools of public health that have summer internships or externships. So there's definitely ways that you can get into applied epidemiology, or at least get your feet wet in applied epidemiology. You just have to do a little bit of digging to find it, but there's so many different programs and so many different ways to get that experience. If you go looking for it, you're definitely going to find it.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. It's definitely going to be helpful to students in epidemiology interested in that. So I appreciate that. So after that, your last role, you then went on to become a lieutenant commander scientist at Commission's Corps of U.S. Public Health Service. So first of all, what is that about?
Yeah, I know. So actually, let me make this a little bit more sequential for you. So I actually was in the public health service during the time that I was an epidemic service, the EIS officer, epidemic intelligence service officer. So the public health service is a federal group that is under the Department of Health and Human Services that essentially serves as the front line for public health issues within the United States. And so they are akin to the military, but different in that they focus on public health and they do everything. I mean, almost every federal agency that you can think of, there is a public health service officer that works in that capacity. They also deploy. So if there is a critical situation within the United States, and also this includes territories that require immediate assistance, public health service officers go out and help with that. So all of the major hurricanes that we've had, Katrina, Sandy, there's been public health service officers who have been out there to help with that. Public health service officers help with data collection and recovery during 9/11. I mean, literally, definitely during COVID, just touching almost every major health event that has happened within the United States. The public health service has been a part of it. I think with COVID, the public health service has definitely been a little bit more out in the forefront. So this is the group that's under the Surgeon General. And so when you see the Surgeon General and he has on his nice uniform, he is representing the public health service. And so when I became an EIS officer, you had the opportunity of either becoming an EIS officer as a civilian, or you could come in through the public health service. And I always wanted to serve my country in that way, but didn't know exactly how I was going to do it, because given my trajectory, I didn't think military was going to be the way I was going to go. So when the opportunity to serve in the public health service presented itself, that's what I decided to do. So I had my nice little khaki uniform that I was wearing every day. And for my next few positions, I was actually serving in the public health service. So when I was a lieutenant commander, both with my work at the DC Department of Health and also with subsequent work, I was working under the public health service.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for that I guess clarification, definition, help in understanding what is going on there. I didn't know that public health service is under the Surgeon General, but it makes sense that it is. So thank you for informing me about this as well. Yeah, you said this opportunity came up. How did it come up?
So when you were accepted into the program, you actually had the option of staying and being in the program as a civilian, or entering into the program as a public health service officer. I mean, it was literally presented to you as an option, and several public health service officers were in EIS already, other cohorts of officers that had came in through the public health service. There were a number of people who worked at the CDC who were in the public health service. And so, as it was presented as an option, I said, hey, let me just, because I had never heard about it. I take that back. I had a friend who told me that she was going to do something that was like the military. And she told me this when we were both in graduate school. And I was like, why would you do that? Like, I don't even understand. Like you're leaving graduate school to go do this. And the way she described it to me, I didn't get the concept. But then when it was presented to me again as an EIS officer, I said, oh, this is what she was talking about. This makes perfect sense. And so given that it was just an opportunity for me, I took it. And it was actually, it was a great decision for me.
Okay. And it sounded like you did a bunch of different work as in this role or with this organization. So what sorts of things did you work on?
So think about it like this. I was an officer embedded in an agency. Now that agency could have been any agency, right? But that is the way that the public health service is structured. You are a commissioned officer, but you are assigned to a specific agency, or you are embedded within a specific agency. So as an EIS officer, I was a public health service officer at the CDC. Okay. And then when I took other positions, I just kind of carried that with me. So there actually was a position that I did with the Department of Homeland Security. I was still a public health service officer, but I changed agencies. I went from the CDC to DHS. And so it's a federal position in which you can transfer from different agencies under the federal umbrella.
Okay, that's cool. And that's definitely something that people can look into if they want to like get experience in different agencies with the agency in different organizations. I don't know how to say it, but yeah, everyone knows what I mean. Okay,
you definitely can get experience across federal agencies. You can also get experience within one federal agencies, but across departments or divisions. And so it's definitely the type of role in which there's opportunity for growth and expansion in your career.
Okay, awesome. And then after this role, you became a CDC assignee. So in a couple different roles so first of all, what is a CDC assignee?
So a CDC assignee is a person who works for the CDC, but they are assigned to an agency that is outside of the CDC. So technically, when I was an EIS officer, I was an assignee to the DC Department of Health. After I completed my tenure in EIS, I worked for the main CDC, so the main Center for Disease Control, and I was an assignee there. And I was still in the public health service, right? So I was still a public health service officer. And so it was a way for me to be able to use my skill set just in a different agency. And again, on the state level.
Okay, that's awesome. So just to talk a little bit about, or just mention the different assignee roles that you had with the CDC, you were chronic disease epidemiologist. You were epidemiologist, I guess, field assignee.
Oh yeah, that's another bag of tricks. Okay. Okay. So the work that I did in Maine, that was where I was assigned as a chronic disease epidemiology assignee. And so there was a structured program that was under one of the centers within the CDC that they had assignees that were working within state and local health departments to help build their capacity in cardiovascular disease epidemiology. And so when I was basically finishing my work with the DC Department of Health, I was looking for another position. And a wonderful woman, her name is Dr. Garrett-Cherry. She spoke to me about the possibility of becoming a assignee in cardiovascular or chronic disease rather, because she was heading the program at the time. And so I said, yeah, because as I've mentioned previously, I had background in chronic disease, right? Like it wasn't something that was foreign to me. And so it made sense. And then the kicker was, it was in Maine, and I was like, well, I'm a Southern girl. I'm not quite used to the cold weather up there, but it could be an adventure. But then I found out that I was going to have the opportunity to be reunited with Dr. Sarah Houston. So it was a full circle moment because Dr. Houston was the person who got me to thinking about the EIS program years prior, right? And so by that time, she had transitioned from North Carolina to Maine, and she was going to be the person that I was going to be working under. And once I found that out, I said, you know what, Maine, here I come. And so that's where I started doing work there. And actually the work that I was doing was serving as the senior epidemiologist for 3 chronic disease programs at the Maine State Health Department. So I worked in cardiovascular disease. I worked in, which for cardiovascular disease, it was specifically heart disease and stroke. I worked in diabetes, and then I also worked in comprehensive cancer programs. And so I was the person that they would go to when they were trying to gather statistics for grants that they were writing, when they needed someone to provide them with data for presentations, that type of thing. So I was the one that was really monitoring and doing the surveillance for health, heart disease, stroke, diabetes, and cancer for the state.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. And you also, well, you transitioned into a role as an epidemiologist.
Yes. So this was another serendipitous moment. I had gotten to a point with the previous position where I was like, I think I want to move a little bit more into epidemiology, because the previous position just wasn't as much epi as I was used to previously. So I ran into someone at a meeting who I had known from the EIS program, and this is a senior level person. And I was telling him that I was interested in transitioning back to the health department, any health department. Now, at the time, I just so happened to be in DC, right? And so he said, well, it's funny you mentioned that, because we have an opening at the DC Department of Health. Didn't you work there before? And I was like, yes. He was like, weren't you EIS? Yes. And he said, well, we have an opening there, and they're interested in someone to help build their epi capacity. Sign me up. I went back to the group that I had worked with before. And even though many of the faces and the names had changed, many of them had not. So it was almost like coming home. And this time, I actually was working more in infectious disease. This is when the Zika virus was at its apex. And they really, on the state level, were trying to build capacity for case investigations, and for specifically for monitoring Zika cases or potential Zika cases in mothers and infants in the DC metropolitan area. And so I ended up going back to the DC Department of Health and working in that capacity.
Okay, that's awesome. That's awesome that you got to have like another full circle moment.
Yeah.
And as you said, got to go back home. That must have felt really nice.
It did. It really did. There were a lot of changes, but there were a lot of things that stayed the same. I was able to work under actually the same supervisor, Dr. John Davies Cole. He was my supervisor when I was an EIS officer. And so, yeah, it was just kind of great to go back to working with family. It was wonderful.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then you moved all the way to Hawaii and you became an epidemiologist coordinator there. So tell me about that process, because that's definitely not Virginia. That's not me. That's not me.
So you know how life happens. So I got married, and my partner, who is in the Navy, was getting transferred. And we had choices of places that we could have gone, and Hawaii was the top choice, and we ended up getting Hawaii. And so we moved there. And again, you know, as an epidemiologist, I'm like, hey, what's the next new thing that I can do? There, I actually had two positions. I had a position in which, as a coordinator, I was working to help develop a chlamydia and gonorrhea, basically surveillance program for the state. And I was there for a few months. And then I transferred over to a position in which I was basically like a mid-level epidemiologist / senior epidemiologist for maternal and child health, again, at the state health department. I have to be honest with you in saying that this was another one of those eye-opening moments, because if you can't tell from what I've been describing to you, I really have been all over the board and doing a little bit of everything. But this was when I really realized that, you know, maybe I should have been doing maternal and child health epidemiology the whole time, because I really enjoyed what I was doing and what I was learning. And this was really when disparities in maternal mortality was coming to the forefront. You know, stories about mothers who were experiencing differences in the type of care that they were receiving during their pregnancy and during their delivery, that highlighted that there were significant disparities, particularly for women of color. And so working in maternal and child health, it really just struck home for me that, you know, that's where life begins, right? Like that's where you want to make sure that you are protecting the people who are most vulnerable. And so working in maternal and child health, I absolutely loved it. And I was in that position for a little bit over a year and a half before life happened again, and I transitioned out of that role.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm glad that you got to have that eye-opening moment. Sorry that you didn't get to do more maternal and child health epidemiology earlier on, but I think it's important that you were out there and you got those experiences, and you're all about those new experiences, and then from that just learning and building from there. But tell me, what's the difference between a mid-level and a senior level epidemiologist?
Okay, so this was really just it was really just semantics based off of how the position was structured. And so what I was really doing was serving as the lead epidemiologist for the division that I was working for, right? But the way that it was written in the position description, it wasn't really like senior level, even though I was serving in a senior level role, if that makes sense. So it was like an Epi 2 position, even though there was an Epi 3 position that existed. I was Epi 2, but I was the most senior level epidemiologist in that division. And so that's kind of where the semantics came into play.
Okay. Thank you for explaining that. And then from this role, you transitioned into starting your own consulting business. Where you're the founder, principal consultant at Indices Consulting LLC.
Mm-hmm.
But I have here notes that you transitioned from being like a lab scientist to wanting to be like a scientific writer. So tell me more about that.
Yeah, so let me start by talking about Indices Consulting. And so Indices Consulting was a business that I started in June of 2019. So around 7 or 8 months before the pandemic happened. And my goal with Indices Consulting is to provide epidemiological capacity and technical assistance specifically to local and state health departments. And that goes back to my experiences in local and state health departments, where I noticed there was a scarcity of, how can I put this? It was like a scarcity of people that were sometimes available to do epidemiological work, especially when there was times where you needed to do like a surge or scale up in the number of people that were doing work for, let's say, an outbreak like Zika. And so in seeing that, I really wanted to provide a service in which I would be able to, kind of plug and play into those roles and help local and state health departments build their capacity and drive for whatever type of mission that they were doing at the time by providing that type of support. And so that's essentially what the goal of Indices Consulting is. Under that, I do focus on maternal and child health, reproductive health, women's health, adolescent health, sexual health, because those are the things that I had been exposed to in my most recent position prior to starting the small business. But, again, I've had my hands in many pots, right? And so I pretty much am able to do a number of different things. And essentially it's what the client would want. And I've done projects in which I facilitated in survey development for a nonprofit organization for an event that they were running, and they wanted to make sure that they got adequate feedback from attendees at the event. I've done work in which I helped create health profiles for a county in a southern state. And so I really just kind of help across the board. And so if there is a project that a local or state health department has, and they're interested in having someone come in and, just kind of help with the development of that project and really driving it forward, that's the type of work that I do.
Okay, that's awesome, and I'm glad to hear that you said that, like, you worked in all these different local and state health departments, so you were aware of them and you're aware that they had a gap in epidemiologists, and you created this business to solve that gap. And I think that that's a great thing to do, and I think more people have to step out and do that type of work. So tell me a little bit more about how you've grown the organization and how it's changed since June of 2019 to now.
Okay, so I realized something that I hadn't paid a lot of attention to, but it kept popping up in my education and in my early career, which was that I genuinely like to edit things. I was the person who would go to a presentation and I'm taking notes of the presentation, and then in the margins, I'm taking notes like misspelled this word, or page number wrong, or transpose these numbers, right? And then I would actually give them to the presenter, like, great talk. Now, mind you, I wasn't the one that would raise my hand and be like, oh yeah, and by the way, on slide 7, you need to, I wasn't that. But, after the presentation, I'd be like, wonderful talk, really appreciated how you explained X, Y, and Z. Oh, by the way, just want to slide you some of these notes that I made, just a few things. But I realized that was something that I was really, really interested in. And so I had an opportunity when I was in Hawaii to work on a major journal that comes out of the Pacific Rim region as an editor. And again, it kept coming back, like, I really like editing this stuff. And so I decided that I wanted to undertake it a little bit more and understand more about what I was doing, because I didn't know at the time that what I was doing was copy editing. I just knew that I like making things pretty and correct, right? And so the more that I dug into it, I learned more about copy editing, and I decided to get a degree. Excuse me, it's a certificate. I need to be clear. I got a certificate in copy editing to make sure that I understood the didactics of copy editing, because it is a vast and complicated and sophisticated field. And so I wanted to make sure that I understood the theory behind it and the tenets behind it. And there's different styles of editing. Particularly what I do is scientific editing. And so just to give you an example, I have edited peer-reviewed manuscripts. I've edited dissertations and theses. I've edited scientific reports. I mean, just really across the board. And so I have kind of grown Indices in that I've added that as one of the services that I provide. And to be frank with you, a lot of the work that I'm doing most recently is really that. I get dissertation students who are interested in having someone review their dissertation just to make sure that the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. And I come in, I can help with everything from formatting, making sure, excuse me, spelling, punctuation, and syntax and grammar is correct. I can help with citations. And so, you know, I just really expanded, again, my skill set to include copy editing, and now provide that as one of the services under Indices Consulting.
And I love that you say that, like, because you started off doing this one thing, trying to solve the gap for epidemiology in health departments, and now you're thinking about, okay, I found this thing that I like. I can pivot and also do this with my business. And it seems
Right.
like it seems like you're passionate about that. And I feel like not many people are passionate about copy editing. So that is a blessing in itself. So tell me a little bit about why you wanted to get the certificate in copy editing, and then what were like some of the big takeaways that you learned from that?
So again, you know, when you decide that you're interested in something, you know, you want to do a deep dive. You know, you don't want to be surface level. Oh, I think this is great, but you know, I don't really want to get into the crux of what it means to do this, because like I said, this is like a very sophisticated business. People have been doing this for like eons, right? There are big names in copy editing. There are conferences that are specifically for copy editors, and science copy editors even more specifically. So I wanted to make sure that I understood what the didactic tenets of copy editing were, because editing is the flip side of writing. If you're a good writer, that does not mean you're necessarily a good editor. If you're a good editor, you should probably be a good writer, right? So you want to make sure as a writer that you express yourself in a way that your audience is able to capture and understand what you're presenting. The editor will come in and make sure that you're doing just that, and they'll make sure that they're doing that without losing the author's voice. And so that's what I felt like I needed to learn, because what I was doing was, okay, well, make sure you put a comma there, but not really understanding that the role of the editor is not only to make it pretty, is to make sure that it is understood by the audience, that the reader reads it and doesn't get hung up on something and can't move beyond the overall message of what is being presented. And so that's what I try to bring to the editing that I do. I always look at it from the reader's perspective first, and then I look at it from the writer's perspective, and then I look at it from the editor's perspective, and go in and say, all right, what can I do to make sure that the author's voice is not lost and it fully translates the message that the author is trying to bring to the reader?
Okay, I love how you put all that together, and that makes a lot of sense. And I feel like we do downplay the importance of copy editing and just how pivotal it is to writing and getting across the message to the audience and whatnot. So if someone wanted to connect with your business and do work or just find out more about what you do, where can they find you?
Okay, so I have a website. I have to, again, full disclosure, I need to do some updates on it. But I can be found at www.indicesconsulting.com. I'm also on Instagram under Indices Consulting. I'm on LinkedIn under Indices Consulting, and I'm also on Facebook. And so you will definitely be able to find me across those 3 platforms, as well as my website.
Okay, awesome. Well, be sure to connect there and find out if you need any copy editing or any epidemiology help. Definitely there's a resource here now. So before we move on to the Furious 5, the last section of this show, I just wanted to ask, where would you like to see yourself in the future?
You know, I have to be honest in saying that scientific editing has really captured my heart. As you can see, I pivot a lot, but once I'm in it, right? I'm interested in developing that as my profession. Like I'm interested in developing that as what I do. And it's interesting that with COVID and having to be remote and virtual and really change the way that we work, I have found that copy editing has been actually the perfect thing for me to do, because it all I need is my computer and I can do it anywhere. Not, just to be honest, I've worked on a beach in Puerto Rico, right? Like I'm still getting it done, but I have this beautiful beach in front of me, right? And so, yeah, I really want to see where this goes. I'm interested in working for, well, I do some freelance work. So I'm interested in continuing to do that, but I'm also interested in working for possibly like a federal agency and kind of getting back into that world and doing copy editing of all of the public facing documents or you know, some of the public facing documents that they distribute. Because again, you know, it's all about messaging, whether you're messaging to the general public, to other people within your profession. You want to make sure that you get your information or your message clearly across to your audience. And so I feel like I want to be a part of that in this way.
Okay, that's awesome. And I look forward to seeing you do more of the copy editing work and expanding and I guess loving the flexibility of it as well, which is always a bonus. Yes. That's great. That's great. All right. So moving on to the last section of the show, the Furious 5 questions I ask all guests. Number 1, what advice would you give to a student trying to pursue a career in public health?
Keep your mind open. Follow your passion. If your passion is, you know, talking to groups of people about, making sure they have good oral health and, you know, making sure that the messages that get across to them are clear and concise. Think about health education. You know, if you're interested in policies around health matters that affect the US or specific populations, think about health policy. You know, just really go where your heart lies in public health. I'm sure that and I can guarantee that there's definitely going to be a place for you. Now, let me give my practical advice. I have quite a few mentees that I have helped throughout the years. And there's some practical advice that I give each and every one of them. And it's this: always keep your CV up to date. You don't want a month to go by and not have looked at your CV for at least 5 to 10 minutes to see, is there something that I've done that I can add? Because sometimes you do things and you forget that you've done them, and then you don't put them on your CV. And it may have been that one thing that could have looked really good to a prospective employer, and you forgot to mention it because it was like, oh, I forgot that I had volunteered with the American Heart Association. And like, no, all of that stuff counts, right? So I say every month, dedicate time to updating your CV. Dedicate time to expanding your professional network. Because one thing that I've learned is that the world of public health is small. And the same people that you run into at the oh my gosh, why am I blanking right now? So let me just say this. The same people that you run into at the CSTE conference or the Council of State and Territorial Epidemiologists conference are the same people you're going to run into at the American Public Health Association conference, are the same people that you're going to run into at the Society of Epidemiological Research conference. These are the same people. So the world is small. So you want to do what you can to expand your network, even if it means getting a business card, even if it means attending a conference session and just getting their information off of the last slide. You never know when you're going to either meet someone that can help you further your career or meet someone where you can help them further theirs. So along those lines, always keep an up-to-date list of your references or people that you feel or that you've reached out to and ask them if they could write you a recommendation for something. And then the last thing that I typically suggest to my mentees is, you know how you go for a job interview or you apply for a scholarship and they basically ask you the same questions, like, you know, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Or what do you consider your biggest limitation or challenge? Or tell me about a time that was difficult for you and how you overcame it. Instead of being surprised by those questions time and time again, you can take time to write out the answers to those questions and always have them available. That way, if you find out on Thursday that there is a scholarship opportunity, but the deadline is on Tuesday, you don't have to wreck yourself all weekend to try to get that scholarship in because you've done a lot of the work up front. And so those are my practical suggestions to people in you know, and really at any level.
Yeah, that's absolutely great advice, and I hope everyone takes that advice and applies it to their life, because that is definitely something that I'm also trying to do, like update my resume monthly and just keep, because as you said, we forget a lot of the things.
Yeah, you do. You forget. Yeah.
Yeah, that happens real quick. So thank you for sharing that. Number 2, if you're talking to someone wanting to get into your position, what advice would you give them?
Same thing. Just keep an open mind. You know, as I've told my story, like I'm telling it to you, but I'm listening to me. And I can see how it's very like, whoa, she was here, she was there. But it's the collection of skills that mean everything, because skills are transferable. And so I would just say, you know, learn as much as you can about what you like to learn about and develop those skills that you can take from one position to another, because positions are going to change. Agencies change. Agencies get restructured, and your position that you've been in for 5 years might change, right? But the skills that you've learned will not change. So definitely, you know, keep an open mind and try to build those transferable skills.
Absolutely, that's great advice once again. Number 3, what's something you are working on improving in your life right now?
Can we say self-care? Yeah, you know, I feel like something that I experienced even before the pandemic was when I had the opportunity to work from home, I actually worked harder, right? Because I didn't have to get up and get myself together and put clothes on and commute to a building to work for a specific number of hours, commute back home. And, you know, like I didn't have to do that. All I would do was roll out of bed, get myself together, you know, fairly decently, go downstairs and jump on my computer and start working, right? Now, I think that's what a lot of people have experienced during the pandemic. But within that, people have worked longer hours, they've worked harder, they've likely been a lot more productive, and then having to do the time management to also balance actually being at home, especially if you have little ones or elderly or older people that you're taking care of. Really trying to balance that too. And so sometimes it's difficult to take a step back and say, but what have I done for myself? What have I done for my mental health? What have I done to quiet my brain? Have I turned off the TV and the phone before I go to sleep so I don't think about it? You know what I mean? Even small things like that are the questions about self-care that I think we all need to be asking ourselves. And so that's what I'm working on specifically, is making sure that I pay more attention to my mental health and my physical health, and to ensuring that I am giving myself the self-care that I need.
Yeah, I love that. And I think definitely that is something that we all need to focus on, especially I feel like in public health, where you're doing a lot of work where you're saving people, but you need to serve yourself as well. So I appreciate that. Number 4, professionally, do you recommend anything?
Okay, so because a lot of my work recently has been around copy editing, I have a resource in mind that I want to mention. But with that said, it is a resource that can be used across the board. If you have ever written any paper, if you have written a paragraph on some topic, this is probably a good resource for you to have. So I'm going to go to my phone to make sure that I'm saying this correctly. So there's a podcast that I listen to. It's called Grammar Girl. Mignon Faraday is the person who is Grammar Girl. And she's actually a faculty member at a university in Nevada, and she's a former science writer. And she actually, in addition to the podcast, has different books out that have talked about the importance of grammar, and how to make sure that you're using correct grammar in things that you write. So I think sometimes as public health practitioners, we really underplay how important writing is, the same way we really underplay how important editing is. But at the end of the day, everything that we do to provide a message to our audience. And so I think a resource like Grammar Girl, either the podcast or one of her books, is really, really good to really try to drive home, okay, how am I at making sure that I am presenting this information in a way that is readable and understandable to the largest audience of people that it reaches. And so I think right now that would be a great practical resource, like a resource you can apply tomorrow if you wanted to really help build your writing.
Awesome, thank you. And I will definitely include some of those books that she's written in the show notes, so definitely check that out after this show. And last but not least, where can people connect with you?
So I gave you all of my social media platforms. Hit me up. Through my website, I have my contact information there as well. Yeah, I mean, DM me on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. I'm around. I guess that's the best way of putting it. I try to make myself as accessible as possible. So if someone is interested in speaking with me, either about my course in life, or interested in some of my services, let's chat.
Absolutely. And I will be sure to leave links for all of those in the show notes as well, but be sure to connect and reach out.
So there's also one thing that I want to mention. As an editor, I've been given the opportunity to partner with More Stat Consulting, which is led by Amy Moore. And she provides specifically statistical consulting for people who are interested in making sure that stats for their documents, whether it be a dissertation, a peer-reviewed publication, are top notch. And we have a bit of a affiliation in which she might help someone with statistical work, And if they mention that they need an editor, she might say, hey, I know someone that can help you with that. And so I definitely wanted to make sure that I gave a shout out to her. I actually talked to her about me doing this podcast and asked her, just a question. Would you be willing to give a bit of a discount if someone watches this podcast and they're interested in using your statistical services? And she said yes. And so I kind of want to let your audience know that they can reach out to her and use the specific code. So the code is TPHM10. And if they mention that code, that they're able to get 10% off of their statistical services if they hire with.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for that. I didn't know that was a surprise to me, everyone, and I appreciate that. So definitely check that out. I definitely have heard of more stat consulting. It's propped up somewhere, but I'm not. I don't know Amy more, but I definitely have to connect with her now. so thank you for that, and I'll definitely pass that on to other people who might find it useful. So I appreciate that. Thank you so much. So thank you for coming on the show and sharing your story and being the ambitious Black lady that you are and doing all the great work that you're doing. So I really appreciate you taking time to be on the show today.
Thank you. It was such a pleasure. I appreciate talking with you, and just keep up the great work. We need people like you to make sure that information gets out there to the upcoming leaders of public health. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'll definitely reconnect with you to do some other stuff, and I'll talk to you about that afterwards.
Okay, that would be fun. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. So housekeeping items, everyone. Thank you all for watching or listening to the podcast. I greatly appreciate it. If you can go ahead and subscribe, like, review, and share this with a friend, I would greatly appreciate it. And it will definitely help someone along in the public health journey. If you want to support the show, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/the PH Millennial and support there. But other than that, I will see you all will see and hear me next week. Public Health Millennial out.